I want to talk a little bit about a subject which I haven't talked for a while, which is extinction. And there's a subject matter which is related to extinction discipline known as demography. What is demography? We're going to look at that today. And how is it related to extinction? I mean, you would think that if demography looks at population and population drops to zero, that's a subject matter that would concern demography, right? So I think demography is related in that sense to extinction. At least you would think that it's the demographers who, to some degree, would have a say in, what causes the extinction of man, an explanation, right? Not only paleontologists and maybe biologists, but demographers and maybe economists as well, right? Okay, so let's look at this. What is demography? Well, let's start here with a definition. This is the one we look up, and it says, the statistical study of human populations. We already have a problem there, and I talked about this the other day, the fact that you can't use the terms the study of. Anytime you define something as the study of, we're talking about irrationality. That's an irrational definition. You can study all week and get a 0 on the test. And the fact that a little boy opens a book and starts studying population, does that make him a demographer? So yeah, the study of for any discipline is a bad way to start the definition. They are all irrational definitions. In science, we do not study. Okay? We do something else in science. We'll get to that in a minute. But it says their size, composition, and how they change through interplay of fertility, birth, mortality, and migration. Well, how is not really the word. The word is why. We're not interested in a description, especially a mathematical description. We're interested in an explanation, a qualitative explanation. That's what science is about. And here from another site, you get this definition. Demography uses scientific methods. Okay, let's see what those are, including data collection and analysis. No, those two are not part of science. Okay, we don't collect data. We don't do analysis in science. You can do that on your own time. When you come to the conference, we want you to explain. And that's what comes next, the formulation of theories. Yeah, that's what we do in science. That's the only part that belongs to science and to the scientific method, okay? To understand population dynamics, okay? But then again, you see, what is a demographer? They say the study of statistics. Statistics is not part of science, okay? Statistics is a language, like, any mathematics is a language, and statistics is a branch of mathematics. None of that belongs to science. Science only explains, it doesn't describe, and that's all that math can do, including statistics. And I just want to point out before leaving this picture here that demographers usually put the S-curve, the red one there on the lower left, that's what they call the population curve, and it always ends there. But really, they always miss the green part, which is the extinction part, which comes right after the S-curve. Okay, so the S-curve is always a partial population curve. The full population curve includes extinction. All species of plants, all species of animals become extinct at some point. That's important to note because extinction is inevitable. Okay, that's what we argue here. The extinction of any species, whether plant or animal, is inevitable. All species will become extinct one way or another. Mother Nature programs or, when she gives birth to a species, already programs the death of that species. They will die at some point. Okay, so what is our definition of science and demography? A little different than the one you just saw. Science rational explanations, that's what science is. And that excludes math. Math does not explain. That's why math is not a part of science. Math can only describe, and descriptions are not science. Physics, rational explanations of causes and mechanisms, and philosophy, the other branch of science, is rational explanations of purposes and reasons. Philosophy deals with behavior and not what anything that Plato or Aristotle or anyone after that came up with. Okay. Now, demography falls into one of these two categories because certain aspects of it are rational explanations of causes and mechanisms, and others are purposes and reasons of what related to population. Okay. So some aspects are physics, some aspects are philosophy. What's here are two examples. Physics, what causes the extinction of a population? That's a question, that relates to physics. Or what mechanism led to 75% whites versus 15% blacks in the U.S.? Now you're talking about a mechanism, what caused it. Okay, that's a question of physics. Whereas philosophy, talking about primarily free will, whereas physics is merely deterministic, objects, things, or mechanisms, unavoidable mechanisms. Here we're talking about philosophy. Here's what purposes or reasons do people have babies, or why are people moving from the rural to urban areas? Those are questions of philosophy. You can say that demography is divided into these different subjects, whether you do the physical part or the philosophy part, depends on whether you're dealing with causes and mechanisms or purposes and reasons. Okay, here I looked up some of the famous demographers, past and present. Okay, and this is what the AI told me. Spitted out some names. And the problem here is that most of these people do not do explanations. What they do is descriptions, again, because they think that demography is about statistics and collecting data and just spitting out facts as they see it. Most of the work of these people has to do with math, with statistics. And at the bottom you see the doomsday equation by this fellow Forster, and doomsday argument, which was enunciated by several people, among them Carter, Leslie, and Gott. It's interesting, this Forster there, he's got a doomsday equation, and it's coming up soon on 2026, okay? And he says, doomsday equation for the Earth's population, the whole planet, right? And he says, predicts it will happen on the 13th of November, 2026. Will be the population or demographic high point, okay? It's the, the point where he says that after that we will become infinite. Okay, so it's a singularity, demographic singularity. Okay, all humans will either disappear altogether, or or something will happen on that date. And it turns out it was his birthday, so coincided with his birthday, 13th of November. And some people think that because his equation predicted some numbers there, that maybe his equation has some truth to it. And the problem here is that, again, all these people do predictions, and people don't pay attention to them because they see them as like modern day Nostradamus, where the guy makes a prediction, says, "Oh, my calculations say in such and such date this will happen," and people say, give it, treat it with a grain of salt, just a pinch of salt there. Says, well, I don't know if to believe that or not, but okay. And nobody pays attention to these people. That's what's happening. People simply ignore them, and they're really blindsided to extinction because of these things, because we have all these astrologers, that's what I call them, and they make predictions on when things are going to happen, especially extinction. Or when we reach a peak population or whatever. Okay, and here I looked up one fellow, and his name is Kenneth Johnson. He's supposedly a demographer, styles himself as such. Here you see a note on Johnson, says that he was quoted more than 2,000 times, and he was interviewed by all these programs and so on. And he says, I'm a demographer and an academic. I lay out the numbers. Well, if he lays out the numbers, if that's what demography is, it's not a part of science, because science does not deal with numbers. Science deals with explanations. Numbers can only describe. Numbers cannot explain. An equation cannot explain absolutely anything. Mathematics is exclusively a descriptive language. So if he thinks that numbers make him a demographer, well, then he's not a scientist. Or we have to redefine what a demographer is in a way that it doesn't involve numbers. But here you can see one of the problems he has. This fellow has extensive academic background. And he says one of the big questions is all these births that haven't occurred. Are they just being delayed? Are these women going to have these babies later than they would have otherwise? Or are a lot of these births going to be foregone entirely? In other words, he's not able to answer the simple question that you would think all demographers would be able to answer, why women are not having babies. He has only the question. So you wonder, with all his experience, how come he cannot answer such a fundamental question? You would think that after so many decades, at least, maybe centuries, in which demography has been around, you would think that by now we would have an answer to these questions, right? And he doesn't. And it turns out he specializes in rural populations, and he says the following. He says, I'm a demographer studying rural America. Now, he states some facts. All these people state them as facts, and in science we do not have facts. Your facts are not my facts or your neighbor's facts, okay? Everybody has different facts. So in science what we have is a statement of the facts. When the prosecutor meets the jury, he doesn't say, look, I've got the facts. The facts are like this. No, he states his version of the facts, and the defense attorney gets to state his version, okay? So what we call them is the statement of the facts and not the facts. But this fellow, he reads them out like, this is a proven fact, and many people probably disagree with him. He may call them ignorant. He said, well, you're ignorant of the facts, but yeah, if different people have different facts or different ideas about the facts or different opinions, we cannot call them facts. He's talking here like if he's got God-given facts. In science, we have statement of the facts. We call them assumptions. We concede assumptions in order to understand the theory. And he mentions several assumptions there. He says hundreds of rural counties have fewer people today than they did a century ago, okay? Older rural residents age in place. Young adults continue to leave. Few young women remain to have children, and the rural child population is diminishing. So he's giving you a theory because he's saying, look, this is the reason child population is shrinking in the rural areas. Thus exceed births in these counties, producing a downward spiral of population decline. Again, these are just facts. What's he going to explain with all this? And then he says 20th century urban population growth has far exceeded that in rural areas. Okay, again, facts. But the problem is, what is he going to use this for? And at the end, he issues what is known as a recommendation, you could say. He's trying to influence the policymakers, the powers that be. Like, you better follow my instructions or my recommendations or else, or this is what's going to happen. You need to create more housing or less housing or more bridges or less roads or whatever because of my data. So he says policy makers need to design comprehensive policies that can address the multifaceted challenges rural communities face. Yeah, when you make a recommendation, you're not talking about science, you're talking about religion. That's not part of science. So again, that portion there is not part of demography if demography is going to be treated as a science. Okay, and this is where these people get it mixed up because they think that by doing some fancy footwork with statistics and getting their facts, their version of the facts, they now are going to influence the powers that be and say, look, you got to listen to me or else this is what's going to happen. Right? That's their posture. That's how these people come across. And yeah, people like this fellow, Johnson, he influences people like the President of the United States. Here you have Trump, and he has this idea that the United States does not have enough babies. He says maybe we should give incentive to the women to have children. I'm sure that a lot of this comes from some demographer who, persuaded him or convinced him, or he listened to this person and said, well, maybe you're right, I think you're right. And so this is a recommendation that he's now turning into a policy, right? Into something that he's going to implement perhaps, right? If it's approved maybe by Congress. And here you have one fellow who's certainly influenced him. His name is Elon Musk. He says he's obsessed with America's falling birth rate. He ran a poll. And they say, well, he must be the only guy because a lot of people in general don't give a damn about women having children, about the population rate and population increase. It says the survey of adults show that only 8% say they are very worried and just 32% say they're worried at all. 59% say they're not very worried at all. In other words, relatively few people think this is a subject matter that concerns them. you say, well, Elon Musk is concerned. Is he right? Or are these people just ignorant? Or why are they dismissing his concerns? And here's another article that puts it in the right perspective. He's trying to, I guess, populate the United States all by himself. He had 14 kids. And he says he welcomed 6 children with 1 wife. He praised the contribution to the underpopulation crisis. And he says a collapsing birth rate is the biggest danger civilization faces by far. There are not enough people in the world. And there's other people who say there's too many people in the world. We should have stopped a long time ago, maybe at 2 billion or 1 billion. And so who's right? Are these just opinions or what? And he expressed concern for civilization if people don't have large families. Is he right? Is he doing the right thing by saying we should go out there and have kids? Is this what's going to save the world from some kind of economic collapse? He says if people don't have more children, civilization is going to crumble. He's saying a lot of the future depends on whether couples have children. The question is he in the right century? Okay, I mean, who's counseling him? Is it some demographers that are whispering in his ears? I mean, where does he get this information? Surely he consulted some demographers, and some of them told him what he's saying out there. It's not like, he's in isolation. It's not like he came up with all of this all on his own. Surely he has consulted demographers, and some of them, or many of them, or whatever, or the ones that he trusts the most, convinced them that you got to do something about the population. Okay? What's interesting is that Putin, he's offering 1,200. He's offering money to women to have children. He wants a baby boom. He's saying Russia has a problem with population growth. In fact, they're in negative population growth for a long time, and they don't have as much immigration as the United States. The question is, right now, population is declining in Russia, and that's a problem for the Ruskies, right? And here you have another fellow who's worried about that. His name is Xi in China. He's worried about also the fact that women are not having children. China is overflowing with people, aren't they? What is it, 1.3, 1.4 billion people? He wants more people? I mean, what's going on here? I mean, shouldn't they start cutting back instead of pushing forward? Shouldn't they re-implement, the 1 child per family? And so, we have a problem here because all these great leaders of big countries, right? Populous countries, they're all worried about population decline or the fact that women are not having children. And you would say, is Musk right? I mean, should we have more children? How's that going to help the economy, right? This is what's behind this whole thing, right? And here you have a country, India, which is ready to become the most populous country in the world. They're not worried about population. They're still growing. But as you can see, if you look at the numbers there, the years, right? Those are the curves. And the curves means at some point they will also be hitting asymptote and start dropping back. Okay, they're going to be losing population. So what's going on here? If every country, including India, is going to fall backwards at some point, we seem to have a problem. Right? I mean, maybe it is a problem, maybe it's not. Some people will say, "Hey, good riddance. We need less people, fewer people in the world." Do we? I mean, does that cause some kind of economic impact on the global economy? Right? Is there going to be some negative economic process because people are not having people? Okay? And here you can see the numbers, and this is what, I don't know if Musk or Putin or Xi or any of these people saw this, but 1963 was the last time we had 2.2 to 2.3, I think it was, growth rate for the whole planet. This is for the world population. And today, where that red line ends, around 2020, 2025, thereabouts, we're at 1.0. So we have dropped our population growth rate significantly. We cut it by half at least. And the green line, that's my line, okay? It's not a projected line or anything like that. But if you read, a lot of these demographers, they do their calculations, and they say by mid-century we're going to reach what is known as zero population growth, ZPG. And so that's why I drew that line at 0 at 2050. This is just statistic, people doing numbers and say, well, we project that by the year 2050, thereabouts, mid-century, we're going to reach zero population growth for the entire planet. One person is born, one person dies. Okay, so it's like they compensate each other. And after that, as you saw the India curve, it goes downwards, right? And the question is, where does that lead? Assuming it continues, right? Does it lead to extinction? Does it go to zero, not growth, but zero population? Extinction, right? That's the question. And we need to figure out, in this case, if extinction is part of demography. Does that conduce to extinction? And what we say here, is that we have two mechanisms for extinction. One of them is the inversion of the population pyramid, which is how background extinctions happen. And the other one's the mass extinction, which has nothing to do with asteroids, with volcanic activity, climate change, methane coming out of, in plumes out of the ground, or any of those catastrophic agents that all these so-called paleontologists have come up with over the years. They haven't figured out extinction. That's the point. And it's important to know how the mechanism of extinction, of a background extinction where a single species is wiped out by Mother Nature, and another one where a whole you could say order, really it's I call it a food chain, right, disappears. And so here are the suggestions here of how extinction happens. We have the overturning of the demographic pyramid, and that's when a single species disappears. Why does it disappear? Because their population pyramid overturns. You have more and more older and fewer younger members in that population. That's one issue. And the other issue is they lose, after thousands, perhaps millions of years, they lose their genetic diversity. So those two cause a double whammy and kills the species. That's for background extinction. And for the mass extinction, we have what is called the ecological pyramid overturn. And what happens there, again, all the animals depend on food, that they find out there, especially, we can understand this with animals that are in the wild in the past, right before humans came around. And you can imagine if the population pyramid inverts, right, for the plants, guess what happens to the animals that depended on that source of food? Well, they go down with it. Okay, so the green one up there, that's primarily, I use it, you can use it for humans or animals as well, but it's a good one for plants. That's why I always keep it in green, because if you have the population pyramid overturned for plants, after millions of years their population pyramid overturns because more and more plants of those types become older and older and older, and they lose their genetic diversity. At some point they have an implosion, whereas at the same time another plants are taking over the land and they wipe them out. So these islands shrink until they disappear, and the animals that depended on that source of food cannot change overnight to the other source of food. That's the issue. That's the theory, okay? And so there you have the mechanism for extinction. And so the question is, how does demography fit in with that? I mean, now if we have a mechanism for extinction, now we can talk about demographic trends and so on, and relate it to these mechanisms of extinction. Especially, the population pyramid overturned, since our population the global population for humans has overturned in 1963, that's 60 years ago at least, right? And we can't overturn that ever again. We cannot reverse that process. As intelligent as humans are, we cannot reverse it. Okay, and why? And part of it has to do, or a great part of it has to do with the fact that what this fellow Johnson explained, which he didn't listen to his own words, okay? The fact that we moved from the country to the city. We moved from rural areas to urban areas. You can't have children in urban areas. They're prohibited. It's against the law. You can't have 10 children in an apartment. It's just that simple. I mean, in the country, you had all this space, And people in the old days, especially, look at biblical days. Why did Israel have 12 boys and a girl? Well, because he wanted to, cover the land. He wanted to create a nation. He wanted his seed to multiply. It was an empire-building mentality. Nobody thinks like that these days. It's totally in reverse. Now we're all concentrated in the cities, and in that city, in that environment, there are not only economic problems, that prevent, lots of people from having children, but then you have, social problems, you have cultural differences from, when we lived in the country. So a lot of things change, economics, social ways of thinking, etc. All that helps to prevent people from having children in the cities. You cannot have children in the cities. It's forbidden by law. That's the way I put it. Okay, and here you see, I'm going to show you a little bit of evidence, little religion to persuade you, just so you see the facts, or my version of the facts. It's called an assumption. Okay, you can take it any way you want, but here it is. You had these animals in the past. Why did they disappear? Well, they didn't disappear because there was some kind of catastrophe, some extraterrestrial impact or volcanic activity or climate change. None of those. What happened here was the food disappeared underneath their feet. That's what happened. After millions of years, you can see here, for example, in the first one there, the Devonian and the Carboniferous, you had non-vascular and early vascular plants. That's what the amphibians ate because there was nothing else to eat. Those were the only foods for the herbivores, and the carnivores, preyed on the herbivores. When those types of plants started dying out, so did these animals. They became fewer and fewer, and at some point they disappeared. They were replaced by whom? Well, the plants were replaced by seed fern. And the animals that came out of that were animals that were small in the days of the amphibians. Now they're big, and they became the synapsids, or mammal-like reptiles, you could say. That lasted to the end of the Permian. And what disappeared there? Well, the glossopterids. They were the seed ferns of those days. That was the only food available almost everywhere. And when the glossopterids disappeared, well, guess what? So did the Permian mammal-like reptiles. What replaced them were the archosaurs of the Triassic. What happened to them? Well, they disappeared when their source of food disappeared, which were another type of seed ferns, the dicrodiums primarily, and that gave way to the dinosaurs of the Jurassic and Cretaceous and so on down the line. What disappeared at the end of the Cretaceous, the famous extinction? Well, again, primarily the conifers. Okay, that's what disappeared. And here we have, here's the graph that more or less shows that, a 4-year study known as the Cretaceous Terrestrial Revolution. And there it is. You can see what happened after the Jurassic. The angiosperms started taking over the land. Angiosperms are the flowering plants. That's what we eat today. Mammals eat that. Dinosaurs did not eat angiosperms. What they ate were primarily conifers because they radiated with the conifers. They didn't eat ferns because that was the food of the mammal-like reptiles. Okay, so they didn't grow really with ferns. Maybe there was one dinosaur here or there that may have carved a niche in ferns, but primarily they ate all kinds of conifers, among them cycads, ginkgos, and other conifers of different kinds. But you can see what's happening here. The angiosperms started crowding out the land, and why? Because the others were dying. The others were old. They had been around for too long, and it was time for the conifers to give way. And today we only have conifers in the northern and very southern hemispheres, and everywhere else we have angiosperms. Okay, partly because we sow them ourselves, but partly because that was the natural fight between these plants. The conifers gave way to the angiosperms, which were more vibrant plants. But you can see what's happening. As soon as the Cretaceous gets to around 65 million years ago, you have lots of angiosperms everywhere, and the islands on which the dinosaurs depended were disappearing, and at some point it was just a critical ratio between animals and plants, and they disappeared. So we don't need any asteroids or any of those things. In fact, here you have an asteroid. This is the way they picture it, okay? They show that the land was covered with fire all over, okay? And they burned all these animals, these dinosaurs. The whole planet was on fire. Oh, yeah, burned everything, even plants, right, after the asteroids hit. Absolute nonsense. This is poppycock. Whoever came up with this has no idea what he's talking about. That's the reality. Okay, you can't say that these animals disappeared because there was a big fire all over the earth. Okay, in fact, there's no evidence that all plants and animals disappeared. So where did he get this? These theories shouldn't even reach. They shouldn't even be peer reviewed, and they should not reach the scientific literature. They have no place in the scientific literature. Turns out, to kill more animals, they put a tsunami. They say, oh, by the way, the asteroid created this tsunami that flooded the land and just drowned out everything. And again, these catastrophic mechanisms are irrational. None of this ever happened. And so, again, these people are inventing stuff that doesn't exist. Fire and water and brimstone, and then you have the also the fact that all the dust covered the earth and the sunlight didn't come in, and so you have this what is it? It's called not an impact winter, they call it. There's an impact by the asteroid, turns into all this dust that covers the planet for several years and killed everything. No such monster ever happened. It wasn't like that at all. It has nothing to do with how the animals, especially the dinosaurs, disappeared. Okay, so those are the mechanisms we propose here. We're saying, the overturning of the population pyramid for background extinction, single species, right? And the overturning of the ecological pyramid for mass extinctions. And so, when you look at it in those terms, you understand that we're never going to have kids again. It's never going to happen. We're never going to be able to overturn the population growth rate. It's impossible. Once you turn that corner, you can't reverse that process. Why? Because we went to the cities. The only way to change that, if you could muster, any politician can muster the force, the power, the authority, would have to move everybody back to the country, right? For what for? Are they going to work with their hands now, where we can replace them with machinery? So man's not going to replace machinery in the country anymore. Machinery has pushed man out of the country, and manufacturing is dying, because it's only becoming a smaller and smaller percentage of the economic world, especially of what used to be called industrial nations. They're no longer industrial nations. Now they're service nations. There's no more industry. The industry is being shifted to places where it's cheaper and you're producing more with less, with fewer people working in manufacturing. Everybody's moving into services. And within services, we're creating this new world, which is internet services. So we're moving from hand services, like, landscaping or barbering or stuff like that. And we're moving from there to what? We're moving to internet services. There's no hands involved there, so except typing on the typewriter, right, on the keyboard. It's funny when the government says that, factory gigs are the great jobs of the future. That Gen Z could work in for the rest of their life, and so could their grandkids. You got to remember these plants, all these automated arms and stuff, they need to be fixed. They all need a technician to fix them. So he thinks they're going to try to put everybody to work, oiling the the robots, the R2-D2s. Robots are already starting to work side by side with humans on factory floors, and it's causing panic among workers that the tech will eventually steal their jobs. Exactly, that's what's happening. But Lipnick snubbed that notion, arguing people will always be needed to repair the robots. Yeah, I don't think you can put 8 billion people to work on robots. I don't think we need that many people to oil the robots. In fact, you can use other robots to oil and repair other robots. So you don't need humans for that either. So no, robots and AI and all this stuff that's going on, that's going to take away jobs. In fact, I heard of a case, a fellow who works in programming. He has, says that, like, there's 7 workers that do internet stuff, programming stuff. And he said what it used to take him a whole week, now he can do in one day because of the AI. He just, just subcontracts to the AI, and the AI comes up with the results in one day. And so if there's 7 guys and you can do the job of 5 days in one day, well, you're going to get rid of some people. You won't need 7 people to do the same kind of work. You can do it maybe with 2 or 3. And so there's got to be job losses, without a doubt. And so that's what efficiency is all about, the fact that you can produce more with less, cheaper, right? And the worst thing that, or the worst cost for a employer is labor. So they don't want to pay labor if they can avoid it, especially, vacation, sick time, all that stuff. Hey, they can avoid all that with robots completely. Okay, so what's the issue? Here's the economic modes through the ages as I see it. And here you see we're hunter-gatherers for most of our existence, maybe 200 to 300,000 years, maybe 10,000, 15,000 years. Primarily in the Neolithic, we were farmers. About 200, 300 years ago, we got into manufacturing, got people out of farming. They came to the cities. We started building towns. And we gradually started evacuating the country and replacing man with machine. And today we're replacing manufacturing with services. First with labor-intensive services, hand services, hands-on. And today, maybe 10, 15, 20 years now, we're replacing that with internet services. Okay, so, and what is internet services? It's unemployment. That's what it is. It's another word for unemployment. What is a person who works with a computer? He's an unemployed person. He's not producing anything really. He's producing a service, and service primarily today is for entertainment, right? And commercials, ads, right? That's not producing anything, and it kind of secondary production when you produce something with a manufacturing people, but or when you build roads or houses or whatever. Otherwise, just singing, that's a service, right? You sing, you're not producing anything. A singer is an unemployed person, and so is a guy who does programming. So is all these people who work with computers, which is, the line item that is growing in the economics of the world. So, yeah, right now we're headed towards a point where, at some point the global economy has to collapse. It will collapse. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. And it's going to collapse because at some point, there will be fewer and fewer jobs, meaningful jobs. People will not be able to make real money, will not be able to pay their rent or make it to the end of the month. At some point, nobody will accept money. Money is what's going to disappear as a medium of exchange. When that happens, when we do not accept money anymore, and people say, well, is that possible, Bill? I'm not going to accept money? Well, I'll pay for your car. How's this? And I'll pay with Vietnamese money. Will you accept it? I say, no, I don't want Vietnamese money. What can I do with that? Well, that's the point. The point is, money is not money is not money. There's stuff which we consider money and other stuff which we don't consider money. So there's a lot of money out there, and I'm sure the Vietnamese government backs its own money, it's backed by their gold or whatever. But you won't accept Vietnamese money for sure. And so money is not always money. Okay? Some people will accept stuff and others won't. Some people may want bartering, accept some good for another good or service for a good or something along those lines. But at some point, you can't run the global economy anymore on bartering. But at some point, the global economy will collapse. It's not a question of when, of if. It's a question of when. When it happens, when the global economy collapses, when money is no more, when we don't trust in God anymore, like the bill says, then we're in trouble because the people who produce food, the companies that produce food, will have no incentive to produce food for or distribute them to the cities anymore. They will have no incentive. So all those demographers, they should really focus a little more on the mechanisms of extinction and then build their curves related to that. But what they do, they just do statistics on past data, and they just project it. They extrapolate it and say, well, if for the last few years we've been declining, the population's been declining for such and such reasons, then we can project it and say by the year 2030 or 2040, this is going to be the population. And you can't really do that because there's a lot of qualitative stuff going on there that can derail all those calculations. And again, we need to understand what causes extinction, and then based on that, then we can go back and do demographics, especially demographic curves.